gathered here to pay tribute to the American servicemen and women who gave their lives, who made the ultimate sacrifice on our behalf. Since the first colonial soldiers took up arms in 1775, more than 1.2 million service members have died in wars and conflicts this nation has fought. Each of those individuals was a loved one cherished by family and friends. Each was a pain-filled loss to their community and the nation. Each was the real deal, an authentic hero who had the guts, determination, stamina, and raw courage to put themselves in harm's way for a cause that was greater than themselves. That said, it's disappointing how national media elevate celebrities, athletes, certain politicians, and activists to hero status, telling us how courageous they are and worthy of our respect and admiration. But we should take heart in the fact that our country has a day set aside on the calendar to honor the memory of authentic heroes, those who were truly courageous and are indeed worthy of our respect and admiration, lest we forget. As we reflect and remember, I'd encourage you to think about and ponder what it is that has inspired the willingness to serve and fight the nation's battles throughout our nation's history. What is the common thread, the common denominator among generations of heroes who have served this nation? The willingness to accept the risks and hardship associated with military service, I believe, traces back to the ideals and values on which our nation was founded. Freedom, liberty, democracy, we the people, and the pursuit of happiness. Boiled down, the willingness to serve is rooted in a belief in the greatness and decency of America. Near the turn of a new century on April 10, 1899, while he was governor of New York, and just 2 years before he became president, Theodore Roosevelt was speaking to an audience. The perspective he conveyed in his remarks captured the essence of what was at that time and is still today at stake in the life of our nation. And he captured the mindset and character of our heroes who have answered the call to duty. Roosevelt said, and I quote, "My fellow Americans, our country calls not for the life of ease, but for the life of strenuous endeavor. The 20th century looms before us, big with the fate of many nations. If we stand idly by, if we seek merely swollen, slothful ease and ignoble peace, if we shrink from the hard contest where men must win at the hazard of their lives and at the risk of all they hold dear, then the bolder and stronger people shall pass us by and win for themselves the domination of the world." I acknowledge, in the context of today's politically correct wokeness, his messaging seems a little off. Maybe arrogant, self-righteous. To the purveyors of cancel culture, which is characterized by the deliberate effort to destroy society's respect for the symbols and knowledge of the history and virtue of the American past, the very spirit of what Roosevelt conveyed is wrong-headed. To those who seek to disconnect us from long-held community values and our national identity, to those who seek to erase our founding fathers and undermine Christianity and its traditions, to those people, American power and influence is the problem in our world. But those people are not the majority. And they can say what they say and do what they do only because this is America. Here's something to think about. Here's something they should think about. In 1776, people in the world, and really since the beginning of time, they had never known the kind of liberty and freedom that is taken for granted today. The history of the world had been dictatorship, tyranny, and subjugation. The people who came to America didn't want to be subjugated to a king They didn't want to be oppressed or persecuted because of their religion. When kings and queens were the rulers and conquerors of the day, justice and wealth was held in their hands. What our forefathers sought to do was take some of that tightly bound power and distribute it so that men and women who could never dream of hope and opportunity would find it through freedom. Freedom that was built on the principles of God and Christianity. Today, the ideals of freedom, liberty, democracy that our fallen heroes fought for so valiantly are under attack. Today in America, freedom is under attack. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise. And sadly, many of those attacks come from within. Roughly 65 years after Teddy Roosevelt, another future president gave a speech to a convention of delegates in the run-up to the 1964 presidential election. He described how even at that time, our citizens were increasingly told they had to choose between a left or a right-wing ideology. He said, there's no such thing as left or right. There's only up or down. Up. Man's old age dream, the ultimate in individual freedom, consistent with law and order, or down to the ante of totalitarianism. At the time, America was in the midst of the Cold War. His remarks were in the context of our fight against Soviet communism. He was making the case for a strong military, opposing the policy of accommodation and appeasement. In his speech, Ronald Reagan said, "Every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. It gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender." If we continue to appease and accommodate and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the pharaohs of Egypt? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard around the world? The martyrs of history were not fools, and our honored dead who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis did not die in vain. Where then lies the road to peace, Reagan asked. Well, the answer is really very simple, he said. You and I have the courage to tell our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We will preserve for our children this, America, the last best hope for man on earth, or we'll sentence our children to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. Folks, over 1.2 million Americans have given their lives to preserve and advance the ideals of freedom, liberty, and democracy. From the War of Independence to the War on Terror, there is a common thread to military service. The common thread is this idea, this belief that America is unique, that it is special, that it is exceptional. Yes, I said it, America is exceptional. Not in the prideful sense, not in the sense that we are superior or better than any other country, but rather in the sense that we are different, that we are uniquely blessed and equipped to shape world outcomes in a positive way. This was the belief of Teddy Roosevelt in 1899. It was the belief of Ronald Reagan in 1964. And my gut says, whether it's spoken or unspoken, it was and is the belief of every man and woman who has put on the uniform in service to this nation. The belief in America's decency and the belief in its military's capacity to be a difference maker on the side of good in this world. This was the higher calling of our warriors, who have died in the defense of America and its allies. Our nation's ideals, having a government that is of the people, for the people, and by the people, and its values of freedom, liberty, democracy, we the people, the pursuit of happiness. These concepts are foundational. From its beginning, America stood for these things. We are the beacon, the shining city on a hill. And to this day, it is why the oppressed of the world still risk their lives to get into this country. And for those who would say that America is a country of institutional and systemic racism, for those who would say that the Constitution enshrines slavery and white supremacy, for those peddling the 1619 Project and advocating that critical race theory be taught in our schools, I would urge those people to consider otherwise. At the time of America's founding, slavery was rampant. From ancient times, it was common practice around the globe. America did not perpetuate slavery, it ended it. And the Constitution of the United States provided the roadmap. The Constitution established the premise that the individual citizen has primacy over the government and that everyone is equal. Everybody is equal. And at the time the Constitution was written, as long as there was slavery, the United States was not meeting its promise. Had the Constitution not been written, if it did not state equality for all, there would not have been a legal premise for ending slavery. There would not have been a legal premise for the Civil War, where 3.9 million slaves were freed at the cost of over 360,000 Union soldiers. Without that roadmap, there would not have been a premise for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. There would not have been a premise for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. For the young people here today, don't ever think for a New York second that America is not the greatest nation on earth. Don't think for a second that America is not exceptional. America paved the way for other nations. America paved the way of freedom, liberty, and equal opportunity for all. So yes, I would conclude that it is the foundational concepts of freedom, liberty, democracy, we the people, and the pursuit of happiness that make America exceptional, that define the greatness and decency of America. And yes, the common thread to military service and sacrifice, it is the common thread to military service and sacrifice that spans the time continuum. To every American military man and woman who has served this nation, to every patriot, to every authentic hero who died, who mortally sacrificed on behalf of our nation, we remember them and we honor them today. In closing, I'd like to rekindle the memory of a soldier and a sailor, members of our community, but from different generations. One landed here after college, and one was a Jefferson High School graduate. One was a newlywed, and one was intending to marry when he returned home. Both were the real deal, authentic heroes who gave their lives in the most honorable way in service to their country. Sergeant Jesse Lotka was a member of the Minnesota Army National Guard. He was 24 years old, killed in Iraq on February 21st, 2005. His death came from a roadside bomb while evacuating a soldier after saving the life of another soldier. Jesse grew up in Appleton, Minnesota. At the age of 14, he became the man of the home, helping his single mom raise 5 younger siblings. He was a high school football player, homecoming attendant, and senior class president. Jesse graduated from St. Cloud State University and moved to Alexandria in June 2004. He was so proud to get his first job out of college, working for Chris Canavati at Lease Servicing Center here in town. Jesse met his bride, Stacy, on a blind date 18 months earlier. She was 5 years older than him, and if you can believe it, she made the blind date drive from Alexandria to meet Jesse for the first time at his apartment in St. Cloud. And oh, by the way, she had her girlfriend on speed dial just in case things went badly in those first moments. Now picture this. She knocks on his apartment door. He opens the door, and standing there, presents her with a white rose, just like The Bachelor on that TV show. The most epic and impressionable blind date occurred in December 2002. Jesse and Stacy courted long distance until June 2004, when he landed the great job in Alexandria. They were married 3 months later on September 18th. In October, Jesse was mobilized for active duty and sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey for pre-deployment training. Except for 1 week in early December when he was able to return home, he spent the majority of his married days at Fort Dix before deploying with his unit to Iraq on New Year's Day. Now, just pause for a moment. Imagine the sacrifice in your mind's eye. The sacrifice in leaving loved ones behind, or in being the loved one who is left behind. This is just one aspect of the hardship associated with military service. And then consider the risk, particularly in time of war. Jesse and Stacy were well aware of the risk. It was discussed at length, but they saw the hardship as only temporary, a one-year deployment. By time zone, Iraq is 8 hours ahead of Alexandria. When Jesse woke Stacy with his telephone call in the early morning on Monday, the day he was killed, she didn't know it was the last time she would speak to her newlywed husband, who had made such an impression with his humility, his humor, and that white rose. The irony is, the night before, she had been reading about the military's casualty assistance program. She had been reading about the casualty assistance officers who are assigned to support military families in their time of need when a service member is deceased. The night prior, she had also prepared Jesse's birthday box filled with cupcakes and over-the-counter sleep aids to help silence the explosions and sirens that were often heard from where he was billeted inside the green zone of Baghdad. At the time, Stacy's job was HR director at Alexandria Clinic. It was near lunch hour, approximately 11 a.m. She was about to leave for the post office to mail the birthday box she had prepared the night before. That was when the uniformed military officer arrived at the clinic to inform Stacy regarding her husband's death. Today, 16 years later, Stacy talks about gifts from God. On that Monday morning, when she was awakened by his call, it was a gift. It was a gift that she was able to speak with Jesse by telephone. It was a gift that she spoke with him each day in the week prior to his death. Among those conversations, he shared about his wedding ring that he wore, along with his dog tags on the chain around his neck, because it was closer to his heart. She talks about the Hallmark movie moments they shared, and there were many, including when she was late getting Jesse to the Minneapolis airport that day in December 2004, when his name was being announced over the airport loudspeakers because the boarding gate was about to close. They hijacked a golf cart to get him to his gate before the last kiss goodbye. She can even find goodness in the coroner's report, affirming that shrapnel from the blast killed Jesse instantly. As Stacy describes, it's a great blessing that Jesse took one step and was in heaven He didn't have to suffer. And when people say hers was a high price to pay for a short time of courtship and marriage, she takes heart in what Jesse's mom and sisters tell her so often. They say, thank you. Thank you that Jesse got to experience in this life what it is to be loved unconditionally. Petty Officer 3rd Class Mike Colton was a Navy corpsman assigned to elements of the 3rd Marine Division in Vietnam. He was killed on 28 July 1969, 8 days after Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Mike moved to Alexandria from Argusville, North Dakota in 1963 at the age of 14. He came with his parents and 8 siblings. They lived on and operated a dairy farm owned by T.A. Erickson. The farm was located on the property that is today known as Geneva Golf Club. During his high school years, Mike worked the farm with his siblings. He wanted to play football, possessed the strength and height to be a great tight end. But Dad had other ideas involving work on the farm. Good thing was, Mike loved animals. He had a pet cow that would come to him when he called its name. Walking the long driveway from the school bus into the yard, he'd call his cow and lie down next to it like a kid lying next to his dog. Incidentally, this cow was never sold after Mike was killed. In summer, Mike managed to break away from his chores long enough to play league baseball. The fondest memory of his youngest brother, Jeff, is when Mike took him to McCarthy's Drive-In on Broadway and treated him to a 25-cent hamburger after the ball games. Mike graduated from Jefferson High School in May 1966 and went on to live with his oldest brother, Frank, in Illinois. When the draft notice came in, Mike opted to enlist in the Navy so he could choose his career field. He became a corpsman because it was his desire to gain experience in the field of medicine and later become a veterinarian. Mike's dream was cut short on that day in Vietnam. The Marines were conducting company-sized patrol and ambush operations in an area known as Quang Tri Province. This was the southern part of the demilitarized zone and one of the most contested areas of South Vietnam, where Viet Cong troops constantly tried to infiltrate across the borders from Laos and North Vietnam. The Bronze Star Medal for Valor that was awarded after his death describes what was happening on the ground in Quang Tri Province the day prior to and the morning of Mike's death. The citation reads, Marines came under a heavy volume of mortar fire and sustained several casualties. Leaving his relatively secure position, Petty Officer Colton raced across the fire-swept terrain to render first aid to the wounded men. As he was treating the injured, he was wounded by hostile fire. Ignoring his injury, he continued life-saving activities, and when a helicopter arrived, boldly stood in the fire-swept landing zone as he supervised the embarkation of his patients, refusing medical evacuation himself. When the Marines came under a vicious ground attack during the early morning hours of the following day, Petty Officer Colton, with complete disregard for his own safety, climbed aboard a tank to treat a casualty and was mortally wounded by the detonation of a rocket-propelled grenade which had impacted on the tracked vehicle. His heroic actions inspired all who observed him and were instrumental in saving the lives of several Marines. Of his siblings, Mike was closest in age and relationship to his sister, Jane, who was 2 years older. Jane was home from college on the afternoon when 2 military men arrived at the house to inform her parents of Mike's death. She was home to do planning for her wedding that was to occur on August 2nd. Reverend Arthur Anfinson, the family pastor who had put Mike through catechism at Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Nelson and knew him so well during his high school years, was also the pastor set to officiate Jane's wedding. Knowing Mike as he did from his high school years in the church, Reverend Anfinson advised Jane to go through with her wedding. because that's what her brother would have wanted. We're so happy to have Jane and her husband of nearly 52 years, Dave, here with us today. I guess what sums up Petty Officer Michael Colton best is his comments that were pulled from the Together We Serve website. The comments were posted by a fellow corpsman on January 3rd, 2003, more than 32 years after Mike's death. The post reads, "Mike was the best man at my wedding. We met at Hospital Corps School in San Diego and were friends from then on. After the birth of my first daughter, Mike would babysit for my wife and I. He loved kids and looked forward to the day that he could become a father too. He was a happy, cheerful farm kid who never said a bad word about anyone. He was tall and skinny. That's how he got the nickname Worm. It was my pleasure to have known Michael Norris Colton, take care buddy." So on this Memorial Day, these authentic heroes, Mike Colton and Jesse Lotka, are remembered. We honor them, and we honor the members of their families who are with us here today. On behalf of a grateful nation, and on behalf of a grateful community, we say thank you.